Have you ever felt like you carry the weight of all the world's emotions on your shoulders? As if every injustice witnessed on the street, every stranger's suffering, every moment of beauty or sadness pierced through your chest like a sharp blade. You are not alone in this experience. There exists a type of person who feels everything so intensely that their very sensitivity becomes a cross too heavy to bear. And Albert Camus, the philosopher who understood the human condition like few others, shows us exactly why this emotional intensity can become both a blessing and a curse that crushes us under the weight of our own destiny. Imagine a man walking through the city at dusk. He observes the tired faces in the subway, listens to fragments of conversations laden with anguish, witnesses small gestures of love and despair that go unnoticed by others. While others follow their paths absorbed in their own concerns, this man absorbs every detail, every emotion, every nuance of the human experience around him. He cannot simply pass by a crying child without feeling those tears burn in his own chest. He cannot ignore the lost gaze of a lonely elderly person on a park bench without carrying that solitude with him. For him, feeling is not a choice, it is an inevitable condition of existence. Camus would call this man a rebel, not in the sense of destructive anger, but in the deeper sense of someone who refuses to passively accept the suffering and absurdity of the world. This man feels too much because he recognizes too much. He sees clearly what others prefer not to see: human fragility, daily injustice, the brevity of life, the loneliness that inhabits every heart. And this expanded vision of the human condition becomes a constant source of pain because he cannot close his eyes to it. The tragedy of this sensitive man begins when he realizes that his emotional intensity puts him out of sync with the world. While society expects people to function like efficient machines, focused only on producing, consuming, and moving forward, he remains stopped before each significant experience, absorbing it completely. When others can watch the world news without it fundamentally altering their day, he feels every catastrophe as if it were personal. When others can maintain superficial and functional relationships, he seeks deep connections that often frighten those around him. This desynchronization with the rhythm of the world creates the first knot of his destiny. Camus observed that the absurd man is one who awakens to the contradiction between his need for understanding and the silence of the universe. The man who feels too much lives an amplified version of this contradiction. He feels an intense need for justice, beauty, and meaning, but encounters a world that seems indifferent to these needs. His sensitivity becomes a radar that constantly picks up signals of suffering and injustice, but he does not possess proportional power to alter these realities. The trap closes when this man tries to carry responsibilities that go beyond his individual capacity. He feels guilty about the poverty he witnesses, responsible for his friend's sadness, obligated to solve problems he encounters along the way. His expanded empathy transforms into a constant sensation of moral inadequacy. Why does he have food when others go hungry? Why does he experience moments of joy when there is so much suffering in the world? Why can't he do more, help more, be more? Camus warned us about the dangers of what he called nostalgia for unity, the temptation to seek absolute answers to the fundamental questions of existence. The man who feels too much frequently falls into this trap, believing he should find a way to reconcile his sensitivity with the harshness of the world, to discover a formula that would make it bearable to carry the weight of all the emotions he experiences. He seeks philosophies, religions, ideologies that promise to explain and justify his emotional intensity. But each answer found proves insufficient before the real complexity of human experience. The search for absolute meaning then becomes another source of suffering. The more he seeks a definitive reason for his sensitivity, the more frustrated he becomes with the absence of clear and final answers. He can spend years trying to understand why he was born with such an open heart, why he feels things so intensely, why he cannot simply harden as others seem to have done. And in this obsessive search for understanding, he loses sight of the possibility of simply accepting his sensitive nature as a fact of life, neither good nor bad, just real. Isolation is another inevitable consequence of this journey. The people around the sensitive man frequently do not understand the depth of his emotional reactions. To them, he may seem too dramatic, too intense, too complicated. Relationships dissolve because he demands an authenticity and depth that not everyone is willing to offer. Friendships distance themselves because his constant presence of existential and emotional questions can be perceived as heavy. And so, ironically, the man who feels more connection with humanity in general ends up experiencing more loneliness in his specific personal relationships. Camus deeply understood this solitude of the conscious man. In The Stranger, he portrays a character who in opposite fashion feels very little, but who also finds himself isolated from society for not corresponding to conventional emotional expectations. The man who feels too much lives the inverse of this experience. His isolation comes precisely from the excess of feeling in a world that values emotional moderation. He becomes a stranger in his own time because his sensitivity places him outside the accepted standards of social functioning. But perhaps the cruelest trap is when this man begins to see his own sensitivity as a defect to be corrected. Influenced by constant criticism that he is too sensitive, he may try to suppress or diminish his capacity to feel. He may seek defense mechanisms, emotional distancing, cynicism as protection. And in this process, he not only betrays himself, but also deprives the world of something unique and valuable: his ability to witness and reflect human experience in all its intensity. Camus teaches us that authentic revolt does not consist in trying to escape the human condition, but in embracing it fully, even with all its contradictions and sufferings. For the man who feels too much, this means recognizing that his sensitivity is not a problem to be solved, but a fundamental characteristic of who he is. It means accepting that he will always feel things more deeply than most, and that this will frequently put him in conflict with a world that prizes emotional efficiency above authenticity. The transformation begins when he stops trying to justify or explain his sensitive nature and simply assumes it as a fact. Just as some people are born with greater athletic or intellectual capacity, he was born with greater emotional and empathetic capacity. This does not make him superior or inferior to others, just different. And this difference, however much it brings challenges, also carries unique gifts that can enrich both his own life and the lives of those around him. Now I want to know from you. Have you ever felt crushed by the weight of your own emotions? Have you ever had the sensation of carrying the world's suffering on your shoulders? Leave in the comments. I feel this too. Your response not only helps me better understand who watches this channel, but also shows other people who go through the same experience that they are not alone. Sometimes, knowing that others also feel deeply can be the first step to transforming this sensitivity into strength instead of weakness. The man who feels too much needs to learn to establish healthy boundaries without betraying himself. This does not mean becoming insensitive or indifferent, but rather recognizing that it is not possible to carry all the world's pains and still function as a human being. Camus spoke about the importance of finding the right measure, the balance between recognition of the absurd and the ability to continue living. For the sensitive man, this measure involves consciously and selectively choosing where to direct his emotional attention. He can choose specific causes to which to channel his energy, instead of trying to embrace all the world's injustices simultaneously. He can learn to feel compassion without necessarily assuming responsibility for solving all the problems he encounters. He can develop the wisdom to distinguish between what is in his power to change and what is beyond his control, directing his emotional intensity toward areas where he can really make a difference. Accepting one's own nature also implies recognizing that there will be moments of emotional overload, and that this is normal for someone with his constitution. Just as a physically sensitive person needs to take special care with sun exposure or certain foods, the emotionally sensitive man needs to develop self-care strategies that honor his particular nature. This can include regular periods of solitude to process accumulated experiences, practices that help him reconnect with himself, and the creation of environments where he can express his depth without judgment. The solitude that was once lived as punishment can transform into sanctuary. In these moments alone with himself, away from external demands and expectations, he can finally breathe at his own rhythm. He can feel without needing to explain, can reflect without being considered excessive, can simply be who he is without adaptations or masks. This chosen and welcomed solitude becomes fundamental to his mental and emotional health. Camus also reminds us that creation is a powerful form of revolt. The man who feels too much can channel his intensity into creative expressions that not only help him process his experiences, but also offer the world unique perspectives on the human condition. Whether through art, writing, music, or any other form of expression, he can transform his sensitivity into valuable contribution to humanity's cultural and emotional heritage. His tears before injustice can become words that awaken consciousness in others. His pain before others' suffering can transform into concrete actions of help and solidarity. His capacity to feel deeply can serve as a bridge between apparently isolated human experiences, creating connections and understanding where before there was only separation. In this way, what seemed like an individual curse reveals its potential as a collective gift. The relationship with others can also be redefined from this new understanding. Instead of trying to hide or diminish his intensity to fit others' expectations, he can seek people who value and understand his depth. There are others who also feel intensely and who can form bonds with him based on authenticity instead of convenience. There are people who, even if not as sensitive as he, admire and respect his capacity to fully experience emotions. The key is to stop relating from scarcity and desperation for acceptance and begin relating from the emotional abundance he possesses. When he recognizes the value of his sensitivity, he naturally attracts people who also recognize this value. When he stops apologizing for feeling deeply, he finds spaces where he can be celebrated for this characteristic instead of criticized for it. If you've made it this far, it's probably because you recognize in yourself or someone close this experience of feeling the world intensely. If so, I would like to invite you to join this community by subscribing to the channel. It's not just about numbers or statistics, but about creating a space where people who live life deeply can meet and recognize each other, where we can explore together these existential questions that move us so much. Your presence here makes a difference, and your journey of self-knowledge can inspire others who are going through the same process. The destiny of the man who feels too much need not be crushing under the weight of his own emotions. With awareness, acceptance, and adequate strategies, this destiny can be rewritten as a journey of discovery and singular contribution. His sensitivity, far from being a weakness to be hidden, can become his greatest strength and his most valuable contribution to a world that frequently forgets the importance of truly feeling. Camus teaches us that human greatness does not lie in avoiding suffering or in finding definitive answers to all questions, but in living fully despite contradictions and uncertainties. The man who feels too much already possesses this greatness in his own nature. He only needs to recognize it, cultivate it, and direct it in a way that serves both his own flourishing and the common good. His sensitivity is a rare gift in a world that often forgets how to feel. And perhaps that is exactly what the world needs. People who still know how to cry before injustice, who still get moved by beauty, who still carry in their chest the flame of authentic compassion. In the end, the man who feels too much discovers that his destiny is not to be crushed by his own emotions, but to learn to dance with them, to live in harmony with his deep nature without allowing it to destroy him. To find, in the very intensity that once seemed like a curse, the source of a rich, meaningful, and authentically lived life. For as Camus would say, there exists no destiny that cannot be overcome by the contempt we have for it, and when we learn to embrace our particular condition with love instead of resistance, we transform even our greatest vulnerabilities into our most powerful virtues.